Hey, everybody. Welcome to Real Words. I'm really excited about today's episode because I have my very first guest. And I'd like to welcome Martin Burns, who is our featured poet for the month of April. I'm really excited about this project and very happy that Martin agreed to be my premier guest. Hey, Martin.
Hey, no pressure.
no, no pressure at all. None meant for sure. I'm just very happy that you
I appreciate
um,
it.
somebody that have admired your poetry for years. You've been sharing it for quite a while now, and I'm so excited that you were willing to. Because poetry is very personal, and I'm very happy that you are willing to hop on this little podcast and share a little bit about your process, about why poetry. So before we get started, though, I would love for you to introduce yourself and tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Hi, I'm Martin Burns, and huh, so just I'm so used to doing this intro at a business level, right? Webinars, things like that. I'm Martin Burns. I've done this and
Yes,
that.
I
Blah, blah,
know.
blah. It's such it's not BS, but there's a bit of fluff in there. So real quick, I am professionally I work in the recruiting industry, HR industry as a consultant. I work for a company called Udder, Udder right now, and I partially joined them because of the name. I'm kidding, but it's fun to play with it. And
That's
they're
great.
good
Yes.
people. Yeah, and they're amazing people. I really got lucky with who I'm surrounded by. And my role is a lot of stuff, but I'm also this ties into writing. I've become kind of the functional CMO for them.
Oh,
And yeah, well, just because someone had to do it, and they're so focused on delivering their work that it's like the cobbler's shoes. They never talk about themselves. I'm good at talking and writing, so kind of happened. Beyond that, who the hell am I? I am. Well, I guess I'm a writer,
yes.
eh, more by passion than anything else, and I can't seem to help myself with it. It's important to me. Been doing it for a long time. I actually took a degree in writing from St. Lawrence University, focused on poetry. So I have the most useless degree on the planet. It's I have a degree in writing poetry, uh, and that's just pointless when it comes to making a living. As I discovered when I was trying to pay my student loan bills, and I'd mail a villanelle, and they'd send the letter back saying, "No, lovely rhyme scheme, but we need cash." So I had to go get a real job,
Had
which
to
is
get
what
a
I
real
did.
job.
Yeah, eventually, yeah.
Well, I'm glad you are consistently revisiting those roots. We'll call them roots here. Poetry is very personal, and we're not here to talk about your job professionally. Um,
Sure.
I I want people to know that you do that, but I also want to really uncover your writing, your delivery, the method that you chose, talk about a little bit about social media and how that's impacted your writing. So clearly you've been writing for quite a while. Do you remember the very first poem you wrote?
Hmm. I remember the first. Well, I remember the first one. I remember. How's that?
Okay.
The first one that made an impact on me, I suppose, and I don't know if it was the first one or not. I don't. I started telling stories and writing stories when I was very young. Even before I was really writing much, I was telling stories to my siblings about my teddy bear Jonathan, and they still remember them. So apparently they're very inventive and creative. Uh, uh, the first poem I wrote was that I remember was when my father's father died, and it was fairly traumatic for him, a lot of stuff. And I just wrote something. I didn't know why I did it, but it seemed like it needed to come out, and that was the form it came out in. And I shared it with one of my teachers. I was in, I think, eighth grade, and we've been writing. I think we must have been writing poems already for assignments, but I shared them with saying I wrote this on my own, and she really enjoyed it. Her name was Mrs. Lovett. She was wonderful, and she really encouraged me to keep writing poetry. And she, whenever you think you write, bring it to me. I'll read it. She likes reading poetry herself, and so that kind of inspired me to keep doing it. I suppose, great
Yeah.
teacher, encouraging me to kind of explore this kind of newfound passion of mine, or whatever you want to call it, or outlet. So that was the beginning.
It feels like, and this has been for like listening to you speak, and this is how it was for me. I had a brother that passed away when I was 12.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And and it was so impactful that I the first poem that I remember, much like you, was the poem that I wrote about his death. And I'd always had this passion for writing, but when something painful happens in our life, for people who lean into writing, not everybody does this, but people that lean into some people lean into music, some people lean
Mhm.
into baking or becoming, cooking and or going for walks or become physical, very physical a lot of physical activity, jogging, running, biking, all of those good things. And it feels like pain is a motivator behind poetry a lot of times, and most times love. There's a lot of love poems out there. So why do you suppose that is? And is that a motivator for you? I mean, why write now even? Why continue to write when things are seemingly from the outside settled in life, that you and I are both in a phase in life, a stage in life where things should be settled. But I, like you, am driven to continue to write. So why?
So I'll start by saying that nothing's ever settled.
Yes.
I wish things were, but they're not. And there are always things that impact you, right? And for me, at least, writing it's not a way of working things out per se. It can be. There are times when it helps. But I'm interested in exploring the human condition in general. That's sort of one of my passions. I find people fascinating and frustrating and terrifying and everything else. And so when I'm writing, I'm not always writing about a responsive emotion that's personal. I'm looking at, I'm trying to communicate concepts, maybe bigger ideas at times that go beyond me. My biggest problem with writing nowadays, frankly, you look at the Insta poets, it's all confessional poetry. It's all basically my heart got broken. I'm sad. Look at this. There's a that's of course valid to write about that, and I've done it myself very recently. I'm going through something, but it's to make it so self-focused. That's doing your audience a disservice, I think. It's selfish to a certain extent, and you need to think about who's reading your writing and
Right.
what you're trying to convey, and it can't go beyond simply your own personal experiences because no one can relate to that. If nothing else, build metaphor, simile, analogy,
Correct.
and communicate that way. And I really believe in that. I do. I believe there's a craft to this. There's an art to it. It takes time to write something that means something that actually will go beyond simply your diary entry that you're publishing on Instagram or
Yeah.
somewhere like that.
So
Um,
you said Instapoet. I don't want to leave that. I want you to talk a little bit about what an Instapoet is for somebody who may be not finding
yeah,
poetry
yeah,
on
yeah, yeah.
social.
That's fair. That's fair. So I do publish my poetry on Instagram. I've got a channel. It's a good medium. And there are lots of folks who do that, and they do well with it. It's sort of like blogging or public. It's a publishing stream. Great, but there is a tendency to write essentially Hallmark cards about yourself over and
Yes.
over again,
Yes.
and you put them around with a nice frame around it and some colors and some flowers or whatever, or barking dogs or whatever the hell it is, and you publish it, and that's fine, and I'm not, and that's fine if you need to do it, but I don't consider that. This is going to piss people off. I don't consider that poetry with a capital P. It's poetry.
Got it.
It is.
Yes.
But if you really want to dive into the human soul and explore it, you have to spend a bit of time with it, and you have to get out of yourself, I think.
Yeah. So when you consider social media and using it as a venue or a platform for poetry, did this start in the early days of social media, or is this a recent development for you to be on Insta? I'm not going to call you an Insta poet because
No,
that I think
it's
uh,
derogatory, and I'm probably being mean, and I shouldn't, but
no, but from somebody that has a
this is my
degree in
passion,
poetry, I think
right? This is my
right.
passion, and I get it. Um, it's folks who like going jogging occasionally versus folks who run marathons.
Got it.
You're you're both using your legs, you're moving quickly, but there's a different focus, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, In terms of social, well, how did I get into it? So I don't know. I mean, I've been writing forever, right? I've written, no, not probably, thousands of poems over the course of my life, and I don't share them very often. It's a rare thing. I'm just not good at that, I suppose. And well, I still have a blog technically. I still pay for it, but I rarely publish to it. Had that running for a while. It's still kind of out there somewhere. I don't really know many folks followed it or got into it, but I found a channel on Instagram, and there are a lot of folks there who do like poetry and are readers. And
Yeah.
it's become there's a subculture in that platform, especially for this. So I thought, well, I'll just try it out. And I've been publishing there for a few years now. It's not everything I write, but if because it has to fit the format, it's got to be short. It's got to be
Correct.
it's
Correct.
got to be, and so you're really limiting your writing, which I don't mind. In fact, I kind of like that. I'm not someone who writes in forms traditionally. I don't write a lot of villanelles. I don't write a lot of sonnets, things like that, which are traditional forms and of poetry, and they're very constrained, and there's strength in that, frankly, because it forces you to really think about your word choice. And if you can nail it, it's amazing. If you can't, it's obvious. So I don't mind the constraint of forms. And in this case of Instagram, in the sense that it's forced you to kind of think very concisely
Efficient.
about your word choice. Yeah, which poetry should be. I mean, I've always, my analogy for poetry has always been that you're like a sculptor, right? You've got a big block of stone. That's the first poem you wrote when you were upset or you're thinking. Those are all the words. If you just publish that, you've published a block of stone. There's nothing to it, right? There's no effort there. The real effort is chiseling it down,
Yes.
chiseling and chiseling until you find the form, the sculpture or the poem within the words, right? The sculpture within the rock, the poem within the words. You get down to where it actually makes sense and it's a real living thing almost. It's hard to do.
Love that.
But the benefit is of an Instagram, for example, is you really got to make that, that sculpture really precise. So I've enjoyed that part of it. I like the challenge, I suppose,
Yeah.
of that. So there's that.
Before we leave this, tell everybody what your Instagram handle is so they can find you.
Yeah, sure. It's a writer, the word writer, MOE. So WRITERMOE, which is my nickname, underscore poetry. So writer Mo
Okay.
underscore poetry.
Love it. Love it
I'll
so
get
much.
two.
And
I'll get two followers out of this one, I think. But hey, so
well, you are the premier guest, and so your this episode will be around longer than any other following
great.
guests. But I don't have a big following yet. But I really
No,
appreciate
no,
you coming on and
that's not on you. That's on me.
no,
Just making fun of myself.
and I'm making fun of myself, which is what
Good.
writers
What we
who
do.
tend to dive in deep and use personal experience and exposition tend to be self-incriminating quite a bit. So
Yeah.
let's talk a bit about. I always like to talk about when we are in this life and grow and learn and maybe have had disabilities in our past. And by that, I'm talking about the wide, broad definition of disability, right? So sometimes a disability is a superpower, right? Um, so, what do you believe is your superpower as a writer or as a poet?
Hmm. Interesting. So, I mean, as far as disabilities go, I've got a list. ADHD, I do. Massive, like severe diagnosed ADHD,
Same.
depression, anxiety, pretty severe PTSD from some things in my childhood. So, what is my superpower? It's definitely not focus, but it might be the ability to. So I said earlier that you write a draft and you work on it. A lot of times my drafts I'm working on in my head. It's hard to really put into words, which is ironic. But it's this sort of churn in my mind, and then so what comes out is the finished sculpture. But I've been chopping at it for a long time, and that's probably the power is that I can get in there and um, I'm not comparing myself to a genius. but Mozart, apparently he wrote everything once. And when they ask why, he's like, because it's always in my head. I'm revising in here, and that's sort of the same thing I'm doing. Maybe there's an
Yeah.
ADHD thing in there. I'm not sure, but that's part of it, I think. When I'm asked to create a document quickly and write something, I can do it very, very rapidly for work or whatever else. I have this ability to write that is in contrast to my ability to speak. Sometimes I have I have speech impediments, a stutter, talk too fast. Yeah, I'm constantly thinking about how I talk and trying to make myself more understandable verbally. But writing
Yeah.
is just like that. So
Writing. Do you think it's because there have been inhibitions removed for you when you pick a pen up or sit down to a laptop or a keyboard of some kind, and it's it removes that thing that gets in the way from in talking, right there. You have this superpower. I'm going to call it
for sure.
the chiseling of your words. You get in
That's
there and
that's
you.
fiddling. It's not the crowing from from Schitt's Creek.
That's right, the chiseling.
The
So.
Skittles have eyes. Sorry, go on.
So do you think that that superpower actually is as a result of, you know, just wanting to get in there and break away from the forms we're confined to as a speaker or as a vocalist of some kind?
I think it's more maybe, yeah, but just to build on that, I think it's out of a desire to be understood that because I have not been understood a lot in my life when I speak.
I love
I mean,
that.
it's been my history. So this is a way I can be heard. Like when my writing is how I actually wish I could speak and communicate. Not just the poetry, but everything.
So much.
It's me talking, but slower.
Right, but you're writing fast. So it's really interesting. So when let's talk about pain. Let's just talk a little bit about pain, whether it's heartache or physical pain of some kind or change. Change is very painful, and the realization that change is happening. Has pain are in times in your life when you've been in pain, do you feel like you've been more prolific as a writer, or is it when you're coming out of that pain and can look back on the pain as a lesson?
Yes. Um,
I like that.
no, so that's not fair. There was a very Hamlet level cop out. Um, the pain is a motivator, right? It is. You've got a lot churning inside of you. There's a lot of language. There are things that you wish you could say that you can't. So it's a way of kind of getting it out, and there's a level of working it out too. But that said, I write no matter what. So if there's a lot of pain going on and a lot of working out, it tends to be focused in there. But even if I'm not in that space, I'm still thinking about, well, people, humanity. I find it all fascinating and terrifying and amazing and yada yada, and I write about it. It's I mean I write poetry almost every day. Uh,
Do you think
It's
anybody can be a poet?
loaded question. Anyone can write poetry. Anyone can. Anyone can anyone can go jogging. Not everyone can be a marathoner.
Got it. Okay.
I'm not saying I'm a marathoner, but I probably can sprint a bit.
Yeah, I think you're a marathoner. I've been following your poetry for a while, and it and how does that fit into I didn't want to focus on your profession for this, but I know for myself, writing has always been a basis, right? The foundation underneath
Hmm.
my work. So, how does your ability as a poet and your superpower to chisel, how does that play into your profession?
Interesting question. Just because I think back to why I went into my profession, which is recruiting. And in the 90s, I was very frustrated with how I spoke. And it was my early mid 20s, very mad at myself for not being understood. So I sought out a job that would force me to speak a bit slower, and that was recruiting on the phone. That was before the internet was really a thing. Hot,
Yes, yes,
Hotmail was new, and so
that's right.
yeah, all right. So I had to talk on the phone, and it was full commission. I did that on purpose. So I would
Oh,
basically,
wow.
well, I told myself, if you can't do this, you're going to starve or lose your apartment and be homeless.
That's your
So
PhD, poor, hungry, and driven.
pretty much. So I did that, and I didn't expect it to last very long, but I was actually pretty successful at it. And that maybe I look back as because of sort of my interest in humans
Yes.
and my level of compassion. So I was able to connect with people about their jobs, their careers, their lives, and I really tried to help them, and that wound up working. So I kept getting promoted, moving forward into highly technical operational roles where I'm not. I mean, I have a degree in writing poetry. Okay, but I am considered one of our industry's like top technology thinkers. Fuck. So,
Yeah,
but
right.
I can think in systems, and I can look at the world that way. Part of actually being a poet and a writer is you're looking at forms, constraints, and how these connect. So
Patterns.
there are things overlap patterns. Yeah, I mean, there's a math element to it that's important. I mean, my SATs were I had the exact same math and verbal score, like exact same. Like there was like so I have that balance. But writing's my jam, and over time I kept forcing it into my world, just from writing job descriptions, career site copy, those kinds of things, and blog posts that brought in candidates. So I infused my world with the writing because it was just easier for me, right? It just I started doing content marketing in recruiting back in 2006 when I first got into corporate recruiting. Just because I needed some way to amplify things in my voice. I've probably been doing content marketing for longer than most folks in our industry without knowing it. I
Right.
was just doing because I had to, but it
Well,
worked.
it didn't really have a title then, right? It
Right,
wasn't called content, right?
right.
Or digital or anything along those. I mean, this has just been in our last 10 years where there's been a real focus on the ability to write. And now I want to touch on something, and I didn't share this with you, but part of my focus for Real Words has been to celebrate original thought that turns into beautiful content, whether it's poetry, writing, novel, blog form, lyrics to songs, playwrights, screenwriting, all of those forms of original thought. And Real Words came out of not a fear, but a desire to remember that real words written by real people who have real emotions are where we can thrive, where we can sift out the pain, where we can
Mhm.
help others. You spoke of compassion in the last question that I asked, and empathy. So how are we going to make sure that original content, your original thoughts, don't get buried by unoriginal? And I never wanted
AI.
to say AI. You said it first. Good.
I knew you were going there. I knew you were going. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I know.
and I have this latent fear that we're going to lose the compassion and the human emotion behind writing. So how do
So
we make sure?
I'm going to solve the AI question right now for everyone, planet wide. No, how do we make sure? I think part
Thank
of it.
you.
You're welcome. Um, Easy question to ask me at the end. So yeah, top of my head, I am both optimistic and also cautious about AI. My weird hope is that eventually it will become self-aware and start writing its own poetry about its experience. It doesn't matter where intelligence comes from. Human brain, machine, as long as there's sentience there and there's hopes and real dreams. And that's, I think, what really matters when it comes to being a writer or poet, lyricist or whatnot, is that you have felt something, lived something, and you're connecting with the world around it. An AI right now hasn't gone through that. They haven't been hurt. So it's going to be surface level all the time. I mean, there'll be analogies and metaphors they can push in, but I think the real struggle with original content is you aren't just throwing out metaphors and analogies. You're building a theme and a story that has multiple layers that resonates. I mean, I litter my writing with Easter eggs and layers of meaning.
Same.
It's important to me. Yeah, right. I mean, I use the Bible a lot. I use the Torah. I use Bhagavad Gita, yada yada, and other texts. There's ancient. There's stuff I like to reference. Gosh, what is it? For the writer, I forget the name. All of a sudden, I like pulling in. I'll move on. Lots of reference points that if you want to spend time with the poem, you don't have to, but if you want to spend time with it and read through it, you can start looking up reference points. You can Google a phrase here and there, and
Right.
you hopefully start seeing that there's another layer there that weaves together with the higher level meaning, and then goes even lower and lower and lower. It becomes geometric over time. I'm trying to build resonance through meaning, symbolism, metaphor, simile. That I think at this point it will be challenging for an AI to really get to, because there's the
Yeah.
emotional connections in there too, and it gets really complicated really quickly to do that. So I don't think you're going to see AI doing things along the level of, say, Hilda Doolittle, right? Who I love, or William Cross Williams, or any James Tate. Oh my God, I don't think you'll see that for a long time until the AI actually is alive and really is experiencing things and can reflect and pull things together.
So when we consider empathy, do you think in order to be a good poet or a good writer, songwriter, that you have to have a high level of empathy?
Yes, I do. It's because again, there's that resonance piece, right? It's both trying to create a sort of kind of resonance with your audience, and that involves empathy, understanding where they're coming from, as well as just wanting to connect with people and wanting to help. I think poetry can help. I think great writing can help people ultimately, and so that's a motivating factor to me. Is the empathy part.
I mean, it's for a lot of it is helping me getting it out and then recognizing when I have feedback that other people feel that way, that other people have had
Hmm.
similar experiences, that I'm not alone in this pain, right? That there are others out there that maybe can feel like I do when I get that feedback. Oh, I'm not alone. I don't I'm not experiencing this horrible time in my life, or this heartbreak, or the strain, the emotional strain that I'm going through, whether it's in, finding a new job or moving, or abandonment, or anything that we go through in life that causes us to want to express. I can't thank you enough, Martin,
Sure,
for
sure.
do you have any last words, or maybe a bit of advice for somebody that wants to write a little more, or
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is don't be afraid. Just start doing it, and don't. I feel like I came across very judgy and professorly like earlier. Write poetry, okay? It's just right. Uh,
yeah.
if your dream is to really dive into it and then spend time with it, think about that chunk of rock and pull it down. There's a writer mathematician named Pascal, classic PACL. You might know him, and there's a programming language named after him. And Pascal was a brilliant mathematician, a very religious too, and he used to correspond with a monastery quite often. And one of his letters, he started by saying, "I apologize for the length of this letter. I lack the time to make it shorter." To me, that's the best advice you can get as a poet. Take the time, make it shorter. Less words is better. I mean, don't kill everything. But if you're writing prose, write prose. If you're writing poetry, write poetry. They're different. There's
Right.
overlap, but there's different approaches to it, I guess.
What's your favorite, before we get away, what's your favorite way to write?
Massively drunk. No, I'm kidding. Uh, I don't drink anymore, so I can't write anymore. Or so no, I don't even know, frankly. That's quite often I'll
Let me make it easier. Pen in hand or keyboard?
brain and head, mind and body. I'll come across some lines in my head and I'll jot them down. I'll come back to them and they'll
Okay.
percolate and then it'll come out. But I type, I write. I type nowadays more than anything else because it's faster and easier.
Right. I don't know if you've heard of the artist way. I just started this project called the Artist Way, and it's a program. Let's call it a program that 12 weeks of reading and writing. And one of the requirements is called morning pages, and you have to sit down and write longhand 3 pages every day. And it has, I mean, that's how I used to write,
That's
right?
discipline. Yeah,
That's
yeah. I still have the writer's callus.
yes, I
I
do
should
too.
do that, but I still have it. It's still there.
And
Yeah.
it felt like permanent ink right there, right
Hmm.
there too, right?
Hmm.
That
Yep.
fingernail
Yep.
never was
Yep.
quite right. So, well, thank you so much. We're going to
Of
share
course.
Martin's 3 select poems that he's granted us the opportunity to share. So we'll be sharing those in our blog at Real Worlds and also in a recitation. And this live stream will also be available on our podcast, our Real Words podcast, available wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. I can't thank you enough, Martin. It's such a
Of course,
pleasure
Amanda.
talking to you and talking about
You
something
too.
other than business. It's very nice.
Amazing. Amazing. Enjoyed this a lot. Thanks a lot. Talk to you
Take
later.
care, everyone.